Christmas is supposed to be safe. Bright lights on dark nights, wreaths on doors, the slow, soft sound of snow on a roof. But there are edges to that safety, a line where the light stops and the trees begin. And for 3 people, that edge was where everything went wrong. Content warning: these stories include invasion of privacy, assault, and a violent homicide. I'll avoid graphic detail, but the subject matter is disturbing. If you're sensitive to that, please take care now. If you love unsettling true stories like this, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss future episodes. Atmospheric note: some of the descriptions of tree lines, woods at the edge of yards, and the cold hush of the forest are atmospheric embellishments, intended to tie these accounts together under the Christmas forest theme. They help set mood, but do not change the core facts of each account. The first story begins with a package on a porch and a photograph that should never have existed. I lived alone in a single-story rental on the edge of town. It was the sort of place where your mailbox sat farther down the road and the last house on the street backed up to a stand of pines that, in daylight, looked picturesque, and in winter made the yard feel small and protected. I liked the quiet. I liked small rituals, steaming a mug of cocoa by the kitchen window, hanging one lone strand of lights when the mood struck me. It was December 20th. I remember the date because I'd almost forgotten to get wrapping paper that year and told myself I'd finish shopping the next day. The sky was a flat gray, and the road was hard with thawing snow. That afternoon, I came home to a small brown package sitting on the welcome mat. No return address, no card. It wasn't much, just a cheap wooden frame, like something from a thrift store. I stood on the porch and felt the cold bite the backs of my hands as I opened it. Inside was a photo of me washing dishes. The shot was taken from outside my kitchen window. I could see my own reflection in the glass and the light halo over the sink. The image was ordinary and obscene at once. I checked the timestamp on my phone. The picture seemed recent. My chest tightened in a way that felt physical. Someone had been outside my house, in the yard, with a camera trained on my life. I called the number on the delivery slip to try to trace where it came from. The caller ID meant nothing. The first call I made was shaky, worked into the receiver. A man answered and breathed on the line. He said slowly, "Did you like it?" He didn't ask who I was. He didn't identify himself. The call ended with a whisper and a click, like someone who wanted to be seen without being seen. I called the police. I told the dispatcher everything I could: the package, the photo, the woods behind the house. She said she'd send someone to stay inside and lock the doors. I did what she said. I locked the side door behind me and sat with the kitchen light on, the photo on the counter. I kept expecting to hear a footstep on the porch. The house should have felt safer with the door locked and the dispatcher on the line, but the opposite happened. The very lock made the home feel like a bottle with someone looking at it from the other side. A little while later, a rock crashed into the kitchen window. It shattered in a burst of cold, glittering glass. When I lunged toward the door, my phone buzzed with my dispatcher again. "Are you okay? Are you safe?" the voice asked. I could barely answer. Lying on the broken window ledge was a folded scrap of paper. On it, someone had written in block letters, "I have more." Through the jagged hole I could see darkness and a suggestion of trees, a black mass where the yard met the wood line. My mind supplied the figure that the darkness could hide, a person eased against a pine, looking down at my house like it was a diorama. The intruder began to rattle the front door. He banged and tried the knob, and then, more aggressively, shoved it until my heart rate became a drum in my ears. I remember thinking very clearly, "Don't go to the door. Hide." So I crawled into the mismatched bedroom closet, just the closet, knees to chest, and dialed 911 with my thumb vibrating. I remember the closet smelled faintly of cedar,
and the polyester of winter sweaters. I pressed my phone into my palm and listened to the breaths of my own body. The banging on the door was loud now. Someone kicked the wood. There was a noise like something being dragged across the porch. Then the sound of a man's voice, low and close to the glass by the back door. "Did you like it?" he said, the same words from the first call. The lights of a police cruiser cut across the house as the sirens came on. Flashing blues smeared against the living room wall where my strand of half-tangled lights still hung. The banging stopped. There was a moment, a fragile, brittle pause, where I thought I might breathe again. The dispatcher told me the officers were at my door. They were. The officers moved with the practiced, professional hush of people who have seen too many things and are trying to pretend they haven't. They swept through the house, calling out as they entered. Fresh footprints tracked on the kitchen tile, a sleeping bag folded inside my hallway closet, a small pile of mismatched clothing. The officers said they found a pillow tucked under a coat and a small flashlight, like someone had been staying inside the house without me knowing. They told me that the framed photo looked like it had been taken from the side path that led to the back of the lot, near the spruce line. They took a statement, dusted for prints, asked me if I had enemies, if anyone knew my schedule. I didn't have enemies. I worked late sometimes. I brought in groceries at odd hours. I liked being by myself, and now I was raw.
The intruder had fled when the sirens came. There was no chase, no arrest. For weeks I slept with the closet light on, with the windows taped and the porch light blaring, the very opposite of the dark, cozy nights I'd once enjoyed. I moved, eventually, to an apartment closer to town, installed cameras with motion detection, changed my locks twice. I told myself these were practical steps and not the small acts of fear that they were. I still avoid looking out my kitchen window after dark. When I hang a string of lights on the little Christmas tree at the end of the living room, I keep the blinds closed, because the thought of someone watching a soft domestic scene from the edge of the trees presses like a bruise at the back of my throat. The forest, at the end of my yard, the trees that used to be pretty in winter postcards, sits now as a vague, unmoving silhouette. I am okay most of the time, but the sense that privacy can be taken with a single step into the dark hasn't left me. We heard a commotion and a younger sibling racing to the neighbor's house to get help. Someone called 911. Sirens came wailing up our street. Neighbors stood in their winter coats in clumps on lawns. I remember the way the snow on the roofs looked like frosting in the blue sweep of the police lights. The next image I have, and I wish I didn't, is of people clustering at the curb while officers carried out a body. There was a tree in the living room, decorated, its needles making a soft carpet on the floor like the worst kind of holiday confetti. Ashley had been killed. The exacts of the attack are something the police and coroner handled. For us kids, the detail that carved itself into memory was not the mechanics, but the way the living room tableau looked like a photograph of normalcy, staged and grotesque. Presents, a small tree, and a violence so raw it felt unreal against the softness of the season. People asked why it happened. There were rumors. Something about a family client, something about an unstable person connected in some way. The police investigated. The neighborhood changed overnight. Porch lights stayed on, holiday parties were canceled, and parents started driving their kids to school even when it was warm enough to walk. Rob quit coming by. He told me years later he had run because he was terrified and later felt unbearable guilt for not being there. He said he heard the knock mimic their secret pattern in his head forever after, like a metronome that measured how his life split. At the funeral, the church was full. People tried to put words in the right places. Tragic, senseless, our thoughts are with the family. I remember the closed casket and the black and gray of a winter afternoon, and the way the community seemed to shrink inward, protective and reeling. Christmas that year was a hollow word for most of us. Small lights became a reminder of the wrongness. Gift wrap stayed in closets. A neighborhood that had always seemed safe was suddenly a map of exits and locked doors. We grew older. We learned to say her name without our voices breaking. Years later, when I drive through that area, the houses look the same, but the trees feel like they're watching in a different way. What struck me when we were young was how the trappings of holiday cheer, a tree, a wreath, music on a loop, could become the stage for such brutality. The contrast between warm, homey things and the act itself sharpened the shock of loss into something that would not dissolve with time. Rob still carries that guilt. I carry the quiet of a silence I kept for years because some part of me thought that talking about it would make the wrongness real in a way it hadn't been when it was a rumor. The third story is the one that most clearly belongs in the woods. That day was supposed to be small and ordinary, a father going out for a tree.
We talk now about the little things that connect you to people. The smell of sap, the way pine needles prick your fingers, the ritual of being together in a cold place with a saw. It was late afternoon, the kind of light that presses gold through the firs and makes whatever trail you're on look like it was made for a postcard. I had a permit for the National Forest lot. I'd driven an hour past town and parked on a little shoulder by a snow-creased road. There were other cars, but not many. Everyone seemed to have gone deeper into the day. I remember the sound of the saw, the grain of the bark under my gloves. I remember the satisfaction of choosing the tree and lining up the cut. There was a hush that felt enormous, the kind you get in a forest when snow is falling and the whole world shrinks to the sound of your breathing. As I started to cut the trunk, something felt off. It was a subtle physical thing, the skin at the back of my neck prickling like it does when someone walks up behind you. I looked up and thought I saw a dark shape between the spruces, a human silhouette a little ways off, watching me. I told myself not to be ridiculous. People walk out to cut trees. But the shape didn't move like a casual walker. It held itself like someone who was waiting for a cue. I finished the cut, and the tree fell with a soft thud that chewed at the quiet. I bundled the tree, hoisted it onto the truck bed, and started to walk back. The truck was where I had parked, on a lonely stretch of road flanked by spruce and birch. The tires looked like two black rings of rubber hugging the snow. When I opened the driver's door, I noticed the front tire was deflated. At first, I thought maybe I had hit something on the drive-in. Then I saw the deep slashes in the rubber and realized it had been deliberate. I wasn't alone for long. From the edge of the road, figures stepped into the gray light. They were wearing masks, cheap white coverings that obscured faces and made the men feel less like individuals and more like a force. There were at least 4 or 5 of them. They came from both the road and the tree line, moving so that the forest itself seemed to cough them up. They hit me, hard. There wasn't much time to think, only to meet blows and try to hold on to the sense of being there for my family. They took my wallet, my driver's license, and then they went deeper, looking through my phone. In a way that felt carefully calculated, they found pictures of Leah, pictures of Katie, and my last name in my contact profile. One of them said my address aloud, just to make sure I understood where I lived. Another mentioned a school name I recognized, not as a boast, but as a lever. "We know where your girl goes," someone said. "We know her teacher." They repeated the address slowly, so that I listened to my life become something they could touch. After they finished, they told me not to call the police.
There was an ultimatum implied, a clear set of consequences that asked me to choose between telling the authorities and the safety of the people I loved. They left me there in the road with a bleeding lip and the cold sucking at my clothes. They left the tree on the tailgate. They left the tire shredded and the truck unable to go anywhere. I limped home under a sky that had settled into an indifferent gray. I saw the path of my lights through the trees and thought about what the men had said. I told Katie a lie. I told her I had slipped on ice and that I would have it fixed in the morning. She believed me because there are small mercies that let us hold the world steady. I buried the look of the forest in my throat and for weeks pretended I had only been unlucky. In time, we moved. We sold the house and took a job in a different town. We told the story to as few people as possible, and when we did, we softened it, removed the parts that might make the danger feel ongoing. I stopped taking Leah to the same parks. I changed my phone number twice. I quit the job that meant I spent more time away from home. We made our private calculations about what felt like safety. We learned to sleep with the front door locked and the blinds down, even in summer. I never reported the assault. That choice rests heavy and private. Part of it was shame and an odd calculus of risk. Part of it was the threat itself, clear as it had been. Don't call. We made a life built around the edges of what they had said. The common thread in these 3 stories is not a single perpetrator or one neat solution. It's the sense that the season, the trees, the wreaths, the warm inside, creates a vulnerability because we lower our guard. The forest or the woodline functions as a kind of border, a place where visibility drops and intentions can slide into anonymity. For the person who had the camera in the yard, that black line of pines was a cover. For the girl in a living room full of Christmas decorations, the street felt like a place people trusted until it wasn't. For the father with a permit to cut a tree, the woods became a stage for someone else's plan. What these accounts leave behind is a feeling more than a blueprint for action. They leave the ache of privacy taken, of childhood innocence shattered, of a family rearranged by fear. They leave a question that haunts. How do you balance the simple trust that lets you hang lights and trim a tree against the knowledge that edges exist and someone, somewhere, may be watching? I don't want to end on a note of pure dread. These are also stories about the small ways people try to repair what was broken. The person who received the photo moved,
installed cameras, and learned how to sleep with locks and soft lights. They reclaimed a life that, while different, continued. The neighborhood that lost Ashley lit candles and brought casseroles. They tried to stitch themselves back together because community is stubborn that way.
The father who was ambushed went on to change jobs and move his family, and he kept the soft rituals that bind a child to parents, the tree, the hot chocolate, the small traditions, even as their way of being in the world shifted. I tell you these stories not to make you afraid of every dark yard, or to suggest that the forest is a single villain. Trees are only trees, and neighbors are mostly neighbors. But there is a reality to the border between light and dark. There are people who find ways to cross that line. If these stories do anything for you, let it be this. They call attention to the fragility of the ordinary and the endurance of the human smallness that keeps pressing onward. If you've survived something similar or have a story that ties a holiday memory to a darker moment, leave it in the comments below. Share this with someone who appreciates true, unsettling stories, and subscribe if you want more episodes that explore the edges of ordinary life. When you string lights on your tree this year, remember the darkness beyond the yard. Not to live in fear, but to hold gently what you have, the warmth, the music, the small hand in yours. The trees are beautiful, and they are indifferent. Between those two facts is where we live.